Hello, everyone. Welcome to our May 2025 REDCap Tips and Tricks session. So this month, we're looking at documenting the unknown. In an ideal world, when we build our data capture, every single field is going to be known. We're going to have data to put in every field. It's going to be complete data. In the real world, things are sometimes unknown. You might have a missed measurement because a machine was broken or a blood sample was lost or damaged. You might have a bunch of missed measurements because a patient wasn't able to come in for one of their appointments. You might have unknown or approximate dates. This is especially common when you're getting medical history from a patient instead of from the EHR system. Most of those dates are going to be approximated or partially unknown. And there are many different ways that you can handle unknown or missing values at the analysis phase. But during the collection of data, it's important to document your unknowns as unknowns. This maintains transparency with everyone that you're collaborating with, whether it's monitors, whether it's just your study team, whether there are regulatory bodies. You want to make sure that you never are falsifying or appearing to falsify data. An honest I don't know is much better to document um, than a false state. And it also is going to reduce effort if you can mark things as unknown. So if you just leave a field blank because it was unknown, people might spend time looking for the data to fill in that empty field. Multiple people might go through the effort of trying to fill it and coming up empty-handed. Whereas if you've documented your unknown, that can be left as is. People know not to keep trying to fill it out. One of the features that REDCap has, this is called the missing data codes, and you can find it under project setup, additional customization. And what this does is it lets you designate missing data designations throughout your entire project. So you set a standard for how your project will mark data as unknown or not applicable. So if we come here, this is the project setup page. We come down to additional customizations. Here we are, the missing data codes. So this is a suggested list of missing data codes that REDCap has already generated. So you can put, let's put unknown. There's also a not applicable. And there may be other ones that you want, and you can also create custom missing data codes. So for instance, let's say that I'm collecting sensitive data by self-report. I'm asking my participants some fairly sensitive questions. I might want to not only document if they're unknown or not applicable, I might want to document if someone declined to answer. Um, there we go. DEC for declined. So this way, when I have my analysis step, I might be able to look for trends in what makes people more or less likely to give me this sensitive information. You know, do they respond better when my researcher asking the questions is the same gender as they are? Do they respond more often if it's a survey that they're typing out versus if they're being asked questions, things like that? That can really help me in some cases guide what I do in future studies. So that's sometimes useful to have, right? Or you might have some situations where you've got, an insufficient quantity, like for a lab test, but you're not always going to have this. So you can choose for any given project which missing data codes you want to use. So we save those, and those are now the missing data codes for this project. And if I come into my record status dashboard and I start filling out a record, we're going to just create our patient real quick. Bilbo Baggins. So these are dates that we pretty consistently know, people's dates of birth and date of consent. So let's come in. So we're going to say that we're looking at data for their 1 month visit. We're going to say that that happened on April 14th and their next visit is due today. And then we come in and we have the different measurements that we're supposed to be collecting. So let's say that my blood pressure cuff was working. So I was able to get their blood pressures, their heart rate was fine. We were able to get that. But something happened to the thermometer. The thermometer wasn't available or something. Um, it broke. That's when this unknown makes sense to document. So we're going to document that one as unknown. And then we get to the lab section. And so for many of these, we're going to fill out our labs as they would normally go. But we might have some that, the tube that this was supposed to be collected in got broken or damaged and the lab wasn't able to run it. So then we might mark those as unknown values. I'm just going to do a few of those here. All right, so those have a value of unknown now. And you'll see that it collects that unknown in place of a number that was supposed to be attached to this. If I did the unknown code in response to a date, let's say this probably wouldn't happen, but we're just going to put, for example, unknown as the code there. It replaces that, even though that's not a type field, I usually can only select yes or no. That missing data field is still going to replace it. And same deal with the state field. My missing data field can still go in there. I could put NA there. I'm not going to save that, but that is the missing data codes will apply to any field type, not just open text fields, and it'll be consistent across the entire project. So when we go into our data exports, reports, and stats here, we go to view our data, we can see, we've got the contents of our blood pressure fields. Those are the numbers. We expect them to be numbers. And this one has that, the temperature field has that UNK value saved to it. And similarly, when we start going down the labs, we start off with some numbers, and then we've got those fields that were marked UNK as UNK. And so if we go to export this data, I'm going to export to R. So we've exported our CSV, and you can see that those fields where we marked unknown, they all have the same UNK code. And this is really useful when you start cleaning and analyzing your data, to have a standardized or a few standardized codes for data that is ultimately going to be missing from your analysis. Another important thing to think about when you're creating those missing data codes, especially if you're customizing them, you want to make sure that that value you select for your missing data code is unique to that missing data code, and it's not something that's going to appear as one of your measurements. So let's say that I go into my missing data codes and I add 99 as a missing data code. If I have measurements in my project that could also measure to 99, like people could have a heart rate of 99, people could have 99 as one of the numbers in their blood pressure. So if I use that as a missing data code, when I have exported my data, I'm not going to be able to tell the difference between 99 as missing data and 99 as someone's actual blood pressure values. So it's very important to make sure that we don't use a value code that could be the true value of any of our fields. We want to keep those separate. And that's why I find it really useful to do missing data codes with these sets of letters instead of sets of numbers, because you just never know what can pop up number-wise, but I know that I'm not going to end up with any instrument that that gives me a reading of UNAV. That's not going to happen. So um, the letter-based missing data codes can be really useful in that regard. Another interesting thing that can happen is that sometimes it's not just a couple of items that are missing data or unknown. You might be missing the values for an entire form. Let's say that someone wasn't able to come in for their 2-month visit. You know, if I go into my forms here, we had our month 1 visit, but we didn't have month 2. So if this happens, it's technically possible for me to go through and mark unknown, unknown, unknown for every single field. That is a thing I can do. But what's easier is, or what I find easier, is to create some branching logic where I can essentially close out that form saying that there's not going to be any data here. If you ever worked with paper case report forms, you may have been told that if a form's not going to be used because it didn't apply or because someone missed a visit, you would create a line through it and then you would sign and date, say that it was intentionally left blank. This is how I basically get that same process to happen in REDCap. So for my forms that can be missed, I'm going to not do this on my visit information form. People have to document whether or not the visit took place. But if my visit didn't take place, I'm not going to have vitals. If my visit didn't take place, I'm not going to have labs. And so this is where I'll create my intentionally left blank fields. So I create a yes/no field that asks if this form is intentionally left blank. And then what I do is I select the other fields and I put this branching logic on all of them. So what I want to do is I want to make all of these fields branch away. I want to hide them if someone says, yes, this form is intentionally left blank. But we got to think about it backwards because branching logic is always written as show the field when this happens, not hide the field when this happens. So in order to say that we want to show the fields, we could do it. We could say that we want it to show when we've marked 0 or no for that intentionally left blank field. And this is valid to do. You can absolutely do this. However, when we do that, what's going to happen is that unless I have gone in and marked 0 for that intentionally left blank field, I'm not going to be able to see any information for this form. Like all I'll see is that intentionally left blank, and I have to press no in order to see what I'm actually supposed to collect on this form. I don't really like that. I like people to be able to open a form and see what they're going to need to collect, open it in advance of the visit, and know what equipment they're going to need before they mark anything. So instead of writing my branching logic for these fields as equals 0, I'm actually going to write it as does not equal 1. So we're gonna come modify that branching logic. So we're gonna clear that branching logic, and then we're gonna create new branching logic. So I'm gonna say, again, we're gonna start with that intentionally left blank field for vital signs. And instead of equals 0, I'm going to say does not equal 1. And what that means is that unless someone comes and presses, yes, this was intentionally left blank, all of my fields are going to be shown. So if I go back to my record status dashboard, into this vitals form that I haven't touched yet, now you see that when I haven't touched anything yet, all those fields are displayed. I can see what information I'm going to need to collect, and I don't have to do anything to this form in order to see it. So that's how I prefer to set this field up. And then similarly on the labs form, they get their own intentionally left blank because it's possible that you could have only one of these be missing. Right now we're looking at a missed visit, but you could have a situation where you got partway through a visit. You know, the vital signs could have gone well, and then suddenly my patient had a seizure and I'm not getting blood out of them today. That is something that could absolutely happen. So I do it for individual forms so that I can mark any individual form that it won't be used. And then just as before, I'm going to select all my fields. Labs intentionally left blank does not equal 1, just like we did before. So if we come in to our record, so this is those vital signs that we marked unknown. We could also have marked them intentionally left blank. I'm going to leave these as unknown for demo purposes, but they can be hidden with the intentionally left blank button. And here we're going to mark the labs as intentionally left blank. And so this allows us to close out that form. There are no empty holes here where people are wondering if we're supposed to put data. We understand that this form is not getting filled out. There are some differences though, so between this and marking the fields as unknown. So if I come to my report in here to view the data as I would export it, you can see that for month 2, when we had those unknowns marked, we used the missing data codes feature to mark these vital signs as unknown. They have a value of unknown saved for them here in the report. But the fields that I hid using the intentionally left blank branching field, I can see those are blank. They don't have any data in them. So those are different ways that it could be documented. It's possible to tell on the form very easily that there's no data for those fields, that I'm not supposed to have data in them because we left the form blank intentionally. I can use that intentionally left blank as a filter to filter out, records where that blank is left. I can do a lot of things with this. This is still very usable for my cleanup and analysis phase, but it might be something that doesn't work as smoothly for certain processes, or it's not how you want to approach your data. So it's fine to do. It's also fine to not do. It's fine to say we're going to use the missing data codes for everything so that our cleanup and analysis process has fewer steps. Totally fair to do. Now, the other thing, when I'm marking fields like this as unknown or intentionally left blank for the form, depending on my study, I might want to know why. So, let's say that we've got that unknown there. Maybe that doesn't matter. Maybe it doesn't matter why it's unknown. We're just looking at this from a high level. Or maybe we want a little more detail because we're thinking through this project as it goes, or we're providing documentation to an outside group, and they're going to ask, well, why don't you have a temperature for this visit? So, in situations like that, where I'm going to want to know why something was unknown, the other thing I want to do is anywhere I can have an unknown or a this didn't happen, anything like that, I want to add a notes field where I can document just anything weird that happened. So I can either have a general notes field that applies to my whole form. I could have a notes field that branches specifically when I say the visit did not take place. I could do that. For now, I'm just going to build a notes field that shows up regardless on all of these forms. So I'm going to add my notes box on here. I always like to align them as left horizontal because then I get a nice full box. I like the look of that better. And it gives me more space to write. Oops, did I put that at the top? I did. Okay, down to the bottom with you. All right, so it's currently at the top of the form, and now I move it down below temperature. So that puts it at the bottom of the form. Okay. And now we go into the labs form, and down at the bottom of the instrument, we're going to add our notes box. Notes. And so now when I go back to look at my records, so let's say for this month 1 where I have that missing temperature, now I can write thermometer broke and have that documentation of why this is unknown. And similar deal here. So I could have patient came down with pneumonia. The patient is not coming in. So that's a good reason for them to have, for this visit to have not taken place. And then for each of these forms, I could write missed a visit in my little notes box. And that documents why I had unknown for everything or why I had that intentionally left blank. And again, this may or may not be something that you need in your project. This might or might not be something that's relevant to your workflows, relevant to your group's needs, but especially if you're sharing information with someone else who might have questions about why these labs were missing, why this temperature was missing, it's really good to have a place to document that with that notes box. The other interesting thing to think about is partial dates. So I can put that missing data code onto a date field, right? So I can come in here. That's not a good example. We're going to go into their medical history. All right. So we can say that this person, had a recent strep infection and they're not sure what day it started, but they know that it started sometime in April, but they can't give me a day. So I can mark this entire field as unknown. But what I can't do with the missing data fields or with the missing data values is put a partial date. REDCap does not allow partial dates in these validated date fields. So what I have to do in order to capture partial dates is I have to break things down a little bit. This is worth doing because honestly, anytime you're looking at the medical history, unless you're exporting it directly from an EHR like Epic or Cerner, you are going to have partial dates in your medical history. No one knows their exact diagnosis date. Unless they got diagnosed with something right on their birthday or right on Christmas, a date that was significant to them, nobody knows the day they were diagnosed. If it's recent, they might know the month. Most of the time, you will just have a year. So it's worth building, especially in medical history forms or medication history forms, the ability to capture a partial date. What we're going to do, we're going to, for practice reasons, treat this as if I've already started capturing data in this project. So I'm just going to show you what that process would look like. So I would want to hide my original start date field because I don't want to lose the data associated with it. And you can't split up a date field without losing that data. So that has to stay the way it is. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with some different fields. So we're now going to start creating a field each for the month, the day, and the year. And then we will ultimately use embedding to combine them inside of a descriptive text field so that people can enter their partial dates. All right. So this is going to be start day. Matrix start day. All right. Now for the months, I usually create a drop down. Start month. And the reason is when you think about writing a month, there are actually a lot of ways to write a month. I could write it numerically. I could write just these little abbreviations. I could write out the entire word. It's going to be much easier to work with my data if I force consistency. And so what I'm doing is I'm creating this dropdown where it'll have numerical values saved for the months, but it provides the display in the month abbreviations so that people are sure of what they're clicking on. We're just gonna create this real quick. Okay, perfect. So now I have that drop down. I'll enable autocomplete just so that people can start typing a month and it'll pull up. Okay, and then we have our start year, and then we're going to go back to the text boxes for that. Okay. And so now I have my day, month, and year, but I don't really like how it looks visually. This is having 3 separate rows to capture a single date. I don't like the feel of that. Many people don't like entering data that way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use embedding and I'm going to put them together in a descriptive text field. So this is going to be labeled as start date. I'm going to create a new variable name for it. MHX start. I'm going to write COMB for combined. And then a lot of the time when I'm working with field embedding, I like to just do things as tables. Tables are nice. And that way I can be sure that things display nicely. So I can do month. Yep. So we're gonna write month, day, year, and then we're going to use curly brackets and put in our icon or put in our fields. So I'm going to need to save this as is, and I'm going to copy these names. So we're going to get the start month first. If I click on this hyperlink, it copies the name, and I hop in here. And I'm going to append to this that colon and the word icons. And so what that does is it keeps the data history bubble and such next to that field so that I can handle it appropriately. All right, we save. We grab the day field, embed that. All right, save. Grab our year field. And we embed that. All right. So now let's go look at our medical history form again. Come in here. And so you see, we've got a place for our month, a place for day, and a place for year. And you can see each of these has the missing data icon still next to it. So we can have history, comments, and we can mark the field as missing. So I can say, well, the strep throat infection started in April. I don't remember what day, so we're going to mark that unknown. And 2025. We're going to say for now that it's ongoing. And that's what one of my partial dates would look like. Now, the end date. Do you want that to be a partial date or do you want to force the validation on it? That's going to depend a lot on how things, how your medical history works for this type of project. If you're collecting just the items that are active at the time that someone starts a study, and anything that gets an end date is going to be something that ends partway through your study, you're probably going to be able to get a date for that. That might be okay to keep as a validated date field. But if I'm asking someone for their lifetime medical history, like if I want to know, have they had previous cancers and when did they go into remission? I'm going to need to make those into partial dates too. So same deal as before. I would come in on my medical history form. I am actually going to be lazy and I'm going to copy and modify my start date field. Oops. Okay, we're going to come down below that end date. All right, I'm going to make this MHX end combined. And I'm just going to swap out end in all of these. Now, this means that I have to name my new fields exactly what I'm typing here, but I do have a system for how I name them. It's end mon, end day, end year, things like that. So this can be a lazy way to do it, but there is also a way of making mistakes with this. So it is absolutely up to you how you prefer to approach this process. All right, we're also going to want to hide the other end date field. Oops. So we're going to hide the original end date field because we're going to pretend that there was already data in there that we don't want to lose. All right. So this is going to be MHX, and we're going to start with the month, make it a drop-down list. I'm gonna see if I can copy my existing choices. There we go, I can. So REDCap will let you copy choices within a project. Any other multiple choice field you've created, you can clone those choices onto another multiple choice field like that. All right, so we have end month. And the way I know that I haven't messed up the new field name is I can see this green field is embedded elsewhere on page. That means I successfully made my field name and the field name in my embedded section the same. They match. If I don't see this field is embedded elsewhere on page, and you can click on it to see where it is embedded. If I don't see that, something's wrong and I haven't embedded my field properly. I've mistyped a field name somewhere, is usually what happened. All right, so let's get the day. One pulled in nicely. Just going to add the colon because it bothers me. All right. And here, HX, and all right, we successfully embedded all three of these. So now let's say that I go to my patient's medical history, and we're going to write that they've had esophageal cancer. And they don't know what month it started, what day they got their diagnosis. They just remember that it was back in 2016. But maybe they remember that it went into remission in June of 2023. It's a long time. 2018. There we go. And the day is still unknown. So I'm able to capture whatever information the patient is able to provide within these partial date fields. And that icons item is what makes sure that the missing data codes remain available so that I can just, instead of trying to type unknown into the day field or make it an option in my drop down, I can just flag it as unknown the way I would any other field in the project. All right, and that brings us to the end of our session. Thank you so much for joining me and have a wonderful day.